by the time we get a year in, last year, the revenues were less than 1%. You know, we have to have a balanced budget. But boy, if something happens, we're in trouble. And I've tried to tell the board that if I have a major crisis in the middle of the year, my options are limited. You know, the easiest thing, and probably the thing that we have to do, is furlough employees. Those are not good options. So by not having some reserves to deal with emergencies, you know, we're on a risk curve that I don't feel real comfortable with.
Another presentation that I attended, it was mentioned that the county side has the 2%.
We have 2 reserves.
Plus the 3% of other kinds of reserves. So when you say no reserves?
Well, let me explain that. We have a 2% reserve that we set up a long time ago to help us maintain our AAA rating. Because one of the things that the rating agencies have told us over the years is AAA jurisdictions need to have adequate fund balances. And when they start talking about adequate fund balances, they're talking 8, 10, 12%. We have 5%. Okay?
5%
so they,
of what?
we have 5% of the general fund. So it's roughly what, $100 million or so?
It's about $107 million.
Right, the two. So the 2% was set up, and it was set up as we would have to have something happen here that happened in New Orleans with Katrina before we would ever dip into that. That is a ultimate reserve. Then we set up the Revenue Stabilization Fund, the 3% reserve, and we put strict criteria on that, just like the state of Virginia has. In fact, we looked at what they did. And what has to happen before we can dip into that fund is that general fund revenues would have to decrease at least 1.5%. So that's close to what, $55 million or $55 million. So we have to adjust for $55 million worth of lost revenue first before we can dip into the Revenue Stabilization Fund. And then we can only take a portion out. And then when we take that portion out, we have to have a plan to show how we're going to replenish it. We've actually had to dip into the Revenue Stabilization Fund once.
2009.
2009. So, you know, the 5% is a minimum that we are barely scraping by with the rating agencies on. And, you know, it should be more, but quite frankly, we don't have the money right now to be setting aside more reserves.
I know you have other funds besides the general fund. Is it correct that in some of those other funds there are also various kinds of reserve amounts?
Yes. So, for example, some of the other reserves that we have, which I think are good business practices, are we have replacement funds for our vehicles. We have replacement funds for our computers. Things that we know are going to wear out and we have to replace. And there's a slide back here that I'll show you later that talks about fire apparatus. You know, we have a replacement fund for police cars and fire apparatus. Well, in 2008, it cost us $800,000 to buy a ladder truck. Now it costs $1.1 million. An ambulance was like $200,000. It's like $270,000 now. Now, the reason I say that is we have a lot of vehicles. It also impacts the volunteers, because the volunteers in most of the stations typically own the equipment. They're very proud of that. They provide a great service to the county. But with fundraising and trying to compete nowadays, it's virtually impossible for them compared to what it was 15 years ago. So in many cases, we're having to step in and help the volunteers because we depend on that equipment every day to see that it gets replaced. So those are some reserves, you know, that we have in the other funds. Based on some of the GASB rules, all those reserves now are identified as to what the purpose of those reserves are for. And I think we show that in the budget. We also show that in our CAFR or our annual audit. But those are out there too. So if we got into a dire strait, yeah, we'd probably look at some of those to see if we could, you know, deal with the short-term loan, if you will. But jurisdictions have gotten in major trouble when they don't have a replacement fund. And that's what always worries me about the schools. The schools have no replacement fund for their buses. They have no replacement fund for their computers. And the way they fund them is they fund them on a ladder of leases. And it's much more costly to do it that way. But they've never been able to, you know, set up replacement funds.
Question on your point, as from your slide, it's more than 52% is for schools. With that fact that you said, I'm still amazed, so I'm just learning this whole process. So the county gives the schools, then to disperse the money from what they ask. There's never been like an oversight of common strategic priorities, common practices. And like I said, I've only been here since 1984.
All right, let me give you just a tad bit of history lesson. In Virginia, it used to be that school boards were appointed by the Board of Supervisors. And then there was a referendum where Virginians said we want to elect our school boards. And that passed pretty strongly. What was not tied to that, though, was taxing authority. They were elected school board members, but they had no taxing authority. So school board members or school board has to come to the Board of Supervisors for their funds. And then the Board of Supervisors decides how much money to give the schools. Once the board decides how much money to give the schools, they turn it over to the school board, who decides how to spend that fund. Now, the Board of Supervisors can't tell the school board how to spend those funds. You know, they can imply and say this is really important to us, and hopefully the school board will listen, because if they don't listen to a certain extent, they're not going to get more next year. But that's the situation